we got to get folks join us via Zoom, so but then Lisa's at the other class as well. But the stuff they're talking about, sex and gender, we're talking about tonight as well. Because we're beginning the doctrine of humanity. I want to begin by just reading a verse from Psalm 139, a line here. The psalmist says, I praise you, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And our discussion tonight and the next 2 weeks will be how God has made us. We call this the doctrine of humanity. And it's been 3 weeks on it for a reason I'll get to in a second, but I'll go ahead and just pause now and pray. Any concerns, prayer requests, things going on in your life, so you pray for?
My cousin passed away this past weekend, so y'all could pray for her, my uncle, and her. She left behind a brother and sister, and yes, pray for them, please.
Yeah, we will. Think about yourself. Your son's on the way back. You think the Czech Republic?
He flew back to the Czech Republic, and then, like I said, Tuesday I took Kathy to the airport. So yeah, pray for Kathy and the relationship with your mom and the whole trip there.
Yeah. And their sisters as well, which I know can be a good and bad thing there. So. Welcome, Mark, Brian, Tanya. Good to see you guys online. So come on in. Join us here, folks. We have no roster here tonight. They didn't finish, but there's some sheets there. And we'll talk about that. We'll just go with that. Look at pray for Jason's family, for his cousin's family, for Kathy and for Dick's family as they're separated for a while, and that he can survive by himself for a few days, and they won't burn the house down, right?
Well, yeah. She prepped some meals for me.
Okay.
I'm not going to starve.
Okay.
I know how to make peanut butter and jelly.
Okay, you can survive things like that. So, well, welcome back, Steve. You're still recovering there. You so keep praying for that. Come on in, folks. There's a sheet there, and again, we don't have any rush, but you can grab a sheet there, and we'll go ahead and get started here in a second, and then I'll talk about the topic for tonight and the next couple of weeks as well. Come on in. Welcome. Good. Let's pray together. Well, Father, thank you for my brothers and sisters and the chance to talk together tonight about things that really matter, especially how you have made us. Help us to understand more of your design and making humans to live in accordance with that and not contrary to it. We do pray for Jason's family and the loss of his cousin, that all those who are grieving now would grieve, but not like those who have no hope. I pray that the hope of Jesus would shine brightly for them and they would find hope in him this evening. Pray for Dick as is separated from Kathy and his family. Thank you for the chance they had to be together for his 50th anniversary, but now we pray for his son going back with his friends to the Czech Republic, a very difficult, cold mission place there. Pray for them. For Kathy, she's with her mom and sisters in Austin, that she gives them good fellowship. All right, I pray for your Spirit's presence here as we seek to understand how you've made us. Some of the questions most that issue in our culture, help us to think through them well. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. We are talking tonight in the next few weeks about the doctrine of humanity, understanding how God has made us. And it's interesting that during church history, there have always been one issue in each era that has taken center stage. For example, in the early church, they really focused on how could Christ be fully God and fully man. Wrestle with that for all. How can God be three in one? And those were the issues that most occupied their attention. And then the medieval era, they were more about that. They focused on the sacraments of the Catholic Church, how what those were and how they worked, and even there was a lot of interest in angels during that. Reformation, recovery and justification by faith alone, and those doctrines of salvation that are very familiar to us. That was a focus there, along with where's the true church. For the first time, there were options in terms of what church you go to. So I didn't think about that for a while. 18th and 19th century, for the first time, there's questions raised about the Bible's truthfulness, its accuracy, trust. That was 18th, 19th, even into the 20th century. Those questions raised. 20th century, big issue was the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. Pentecostal movement went from 0 to 500 million in 100 years. That's a pretty big story there. In the 21st century, what are the issues most pressing? I think it's this one. doctrine of humanity, and how God has made us. And so this has been my interest for the last 12 or 15 years, something like that. So last month at last, a book came out. Been working on this thing for 12 years and it finally came out. So it's on the doctrine of humanity. So that's been a long time coming. And so that's one of the reasons perhaps why we're spending so much time on this. I've invested in my life the last few years. And then when I first began thinking about this doctrine of humanity, I just started in Genesis 1:1 and started thinking through the things we're talking about God's design of us before the fall. And that we're created. That's important. We're not accident, but we're created. We're created in the image of God. And we'll talk, what exactly does that mean? Seems pretty important, very up front. We're created male and female. And oh my, how that's been confused these days. Yeah? Understanding that. So we'll focus on those three tonight. It's interesting, you go on further in Genesis 2, we're made to work. We could be workers. That wasn't for the fall, that was before the fall. We're with a complex constitution. We're not just bodies, we're bodies and spirits. So there's some complexity there. We're made for, we discovered this during COVID, that people don't do well in isolation because we're made for community. And then we'll talk about the fact that we're not today as we're fallen. And so you can't reason from what is what ought to be. You can't say, well, God made you this way, so I should live this way. Well, you're fallen. If you do what comes naturally, you will not do well. It will not go well. And then we're not that we will be, we're being sanctified and we'll be glorified. So that's kind of the coming attraction. It's amazing how much we're talking about the first 3 chapters of the Bible. Yeah. And there's so much foundational stuff there. Think about a book that says, all I need to learn, I learned in kindergarten. And like that, but the very first, there's some foundational lessons. Well, these are the lessons about humanity that we begin in Genesis. Now, we talked a couple weeks about God being the creator. I don't want to go too far on that. I just mentioned 2 or 3 things about being created by God. It's part of the gospel because it creates our accountability. God can say, I gave you a life. Did you use it in ways that I wanted you to? Did you even ask me about what those ways are? Yeah. So you got a life. You're responsible. You're accountable. God gave you a life. Yes, you're right. How do you use it? So our creation by God is critical. It also should give us some humility. There are no self-made men or women. We all owe our creation to God, those types of things. And so a little bit humble there. And then just recognizing we're not just made by God, we're made for God. And you can't escape that. Augustine said, you measure yourself, our hearts are restless until they find rest in you, O God. So God, he's made us for himself. And so we're restless, we're seeking for something. We don't often know what that is, but that's God. So that's our effect of being created by God. Now, there's tons and tons of stuff we could go beyond that. Let me pause for a second. I'm going to further on those issues of being created by God. The first major foundational fact about humans that we're made by God. I'm going further on that issue. I want to focus on 2 further we find in Genesis 1. And so turn that we are created in God's image. So turn to Genesis 1, and we'll find this is kind of mentioned pretty emphatically in Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Again, the first thing we find about humans other than created, God said, let's make humans in our image, in our likeness, so that they rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, over the livestock, over all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created human in his own image. And then he created them, male and he created them. So we find out both is that we're made in God's image. Now, we are not God's image. That's Jesus. And he alone is God. But we're made in or according to God's image, likeness, those types of things. So this is the first foundational text, Genesis 1. So this says humans, emphasizes male and female. So I think this speaks about all humans. This is something true of humans as, in fact, it's interesting because of all the creatures mentioned in Genesis 1, only one are made in God's image. not the birds, not the beasts of the sea, only humans. So this is our human distinctive. Only humans are made in God's image. This is something that's very important there. It's mentioned as well in Genesis 5. So it says the same thing in Genesis 5, 1 and 2, again, made in the likeness of God there. So the second implication, this is something that's still true of us after the fall. In Genesis 5 is that we've fallen. Human nature is now been corrupted by sin, but still, humans have a dignity of being made in God's image. So whatever the fall did to us, it didn't erase us being made in God's image according to God's likeness. So that's there. So another important little fact there. Genesis 9 has a very interesting insight there. This is after the flood. When they come out of the ark, they're resettling on the ground again. Look at Genesis 9:6. Whoever sheds human blood, by human beings shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God has God made humankind. So he says, if you kill someone, you forfeit your life. Why? You've attacked God's image bearers. You've done something so horrible, you forfeit life. There's a lot of discussion as to whether being pro-life means you're being anti-capital punishment. But this verse seems that, or if you're pro-life, this is something sacred, something that God has given in his image. If you take a life, you've done something so horrible, so heinous, you forfeit your own life. So whatever this image of God stuff is something that gives us tremendous value. Because if you kill an animal, no big deal. You kill a human, you forfeit your life. So there's something transcendent value in humans. And so this is the basis for human dignity, which is a very, very big deal in our culture. But the grounding for it, the rationale for it, not often given clearly, because the only rationale for treating humans special, because we're made in God's image. And this is why we believe in what's called the sanctity of human life. And human life is sacred because it's an image bearer of God. So that's Genesis 9. And then one final verse, James 3. James 3 kind of takes this idea of Genesis 9 one step further. It says that James 3, 9 and 10 says, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brother said, this should not be. So not only is it wrong to kill a human, it's wrong to curse a human because they've been made in God's likeness. So humans are precious, they're special, they're different. And again, this is being of all humans generically. Male and female, specifically in Genesis 1, all humans are valuable, all humans bear God's likeness. So see, I call these foundational because these are the speak about all people, not just believers. This is all humans. All humans share this. And so anybody that you speak to, their deepest identity is image bearer of God. And we identify ourselves in lots of different ways. And some of those ways are not very helpful today in terms of our sexual temptations and being identified. Well, no, your truth identity, you are an image bearer of God. Well, so these are the four foundational texts. And so there's three places. So what is it? What? There's no definition here. You have this phrase, image of God, no definition, but whatever it is, so that makes you distinctive. There's something only humans have, something that gives us great value. So if you kill a human, you forfeit your life. Even cursing an image bearer is something wrong. It's something that endures after the fall. So we're going to look at a second at some options on this, but whatever it is, it must fit these things. It must be something that gives us great value. Yeah. Something true of all humans, and this is one of the most difficult things. Something true of all humans, young, old, rich, poor, male, female, all types of classes and cultures. What's true of all humans? And then something that may have been affected by the fall, but was not erased by the fall. So we'll come back to that. So those are these are just 4 foundational. They're not more than that, but this is pretty substantial here. Old Testament, New Testament. And again, that Genesis 1, pretty in fact 3 times. Image of God, image of God. The likeness fit in there too. So both those are used to seen as both synonyms, but image and likeness, same idea there. There's steps to the thing. So this is the first step in our understanding of this. Something true of all people, gives us value, dignity, endures after the fall. And then the 2 more texts, we'll just look at Colossians 1:15. And this is Jesus. He is the image of God. Colossians 1:15. It says the Son is not in, but he is the image of the invisible God, firstborn over all creation. So this is something true only of Jesus. I am not the image of God. I'm created in the image, according to God's likeness. But the image is a statement of deity. We say Jesus is we're saying he is God. This is what Jesus said. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I wouldn't say that about me. Yeah, but Jesus could, because he was God incarnate. So he's something special here. So it's interesting. So as God, Jesus is the image. As a human, he is created in the image. Because he's true man too. And if all humans are image bearers, Jesus is both the image and in the image. And so this is something that we can say, well, then in what way is Jesus the perfect human, and we are somehow pale reflections of that? So there's something about being image bearer that Jesus does perfectly, okay? Because he's perfect man, okay? So that's Jesus. And then there are about 4 or 5 what I call Christian texts, and these are things only true of believers. I'm going to take them in a little bit different order than they're given there. Look at Colossians 3:10 for a second. I'll back up to verse 9 to give the full sentence. Paul writes, do not lie to each other, since you've taken off your old self with its practices, you put on the new self, which is being renewed in us in the image of Creator. Well, this speaks about this thing being renewed. Well, what happened to the image of God? Well, something I think it needs to be renewed. So this is something that's not static. It can be damaged and be renewed. In fact, it's being renewed. I think he's describing their conversion, putting on the new self. Well, so in conversion, the image of God in you is renewed. Hold that in your heart and turn to 2 Corinthians 3 for a second. Further that can happen to the image. 2 Corinthians 3:18, Paul says, we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes to Lord. We're being transformed into his image. Well, we're in it, but now there's something else happening. That's a dynamic transformation. So this image can be renewed. It can be transformed further. So there's something dynamic about this thing. The image, there's something that can grow and develop those types of things. And then one final text that kind of goes along this way, Romans 8:29. It says, those God foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of, well, the image of his Son is the image of God, because the Son is God. So, but we're being renewed, and one way will be conformed to the image. So this is something that can be progressive, dynamic, those types of things. And so this is something that's quite often overlooked in discussion. So whatever this thing is, it might be something capable of being renewed, growth and transformation, and then finally conformity to Christ as the perfect, and those types of things. And then there's one more verse that I'll just throw in, 1 Corinthians 15:49. Now, 1 Corinthians 15 is the great chapter of the resurrection. And so it's the resurrection of Christ and our resurrection. It says in verse 49 that just as we have borne the image of the earthly man, so shall we bear the image of the head. Well, that's the image of Christ. So is there something to do with a physical aspect of this image bearing? This is not nearly as clear as the other verses to me, but at least a possibility there. So from these verses, we get the idea that the image is something that's dynamic. It can be renewed, it can grow, those types of things. It will eventually be conformed to the image of Christ, and so be like Him. And perhaps it's something that has a bodily aspect as well, because we conform. Because that 1 Corinthians 15 passage talks about we were like Adam physically, will be like the man of Christ physically after resurrection. So maybe something there that would imply there. But the second implication, if it's being renewed, well, then it seems that something happened in the fall that damaged. Some use like it was defaced but not erased. Because we still have that dignity and value and worth. But if it can be renewed in conversion, transformed in the process of sanctification, and one day conformed to Christ, well, it probably was damaged by the image of God. So what could it be? This thing called image of God, a very important idea, those types of things. Well, a couple of major ideas. Some say that this is a function that only humans can do. And they think that the clearest clues is Genesis 1, that very first passage there. They say, since we're told that we're made God, see what's it mentioned? It mentions ruling over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky. So they say, being made God means exercising dominion over creation. But I think there's a couple of problems with that. Is this something that all people do? Well, think about those with disabilities, or very young kids, or those with Alzheimer's. I don't think that we all exercise dominion. And furthermore, it's interesting, you look at that first passage of Genesis 1:26, it says, let's make humans in so that. So this is a consequence of being, because you're made, you can do this, but this is not the content of it. More concept. And of the last weakness is this is the only passage that mentions that. Other passages, they don't mention that. So this is something very popular in some circles. That being a human image means you exercise dominion like God does. I don't think that's what it's talking about. If there may be something there, because they said in the ancient Near East when Genesis was written, what some of the kings did that they made images and put them on the far flung corners of the empire, so people know what their emperor looks like. That maybe they were God's visible were intended to represent God before the rest of it, including things like angels. Angels don't bear God's image. We do. What do we have that angels don't have? We have a body. Angels are spirit. So we can visibly represent it. That may be a secondary idea there, but I don't think we've gotten where it should. Function probably not the center of this. Well, is there some capacity that all humans have? And probably the most common suggestion through history has been reason. This is things that are human distinctive, and they say, therefore, the image of God must have something to do with our having the capacity for reason. Can you see a possible problem with that, though?
Our thoughts are not his thoughts.
Okay.
We can't even comprehend it.
So we're very limited in reason, but think about those that have mental disabilities. Are they non-image bearers of God? Or if someone loses their reason through Alzheimer's, dementia, are they no longer image bearer of God? I don't want to say that, because all humans are image. So I'm not, and therefore, would a child be less of an image bearer than a full-grown adult who has more reason? I don't think reason is the best place to lodge this. Okay, So there's been other suggestions, things like that. And finding something that all humans share has been a difficulty. Creativity, I'm not very creative, so finding that we all share it has been difficult. But I think there's one thing that fits the capacity for relationship with God. Now, if you have a pet, they will never pray. They will never read the Bible. They will never worship. They lack that capacity. Only humans have that capacity. But all humans, even someone with Alzheimer's, if they were a saint of God, they didn't lose their relationship with God when they lost their reason. I think God maintains that. And even before birth, John the Baptist jumped for joy in his mother's womb. So the capacity for relate, it may be something that can bypass reason. That it normally uses reason, but as we die, we won't have brains for a while, and we'll still be in relationship with God. So I think that capacity is lodged in the thing called the Spirit. That thing that survives, that is that capacity. Now, normally, I think that capacity uses your reason to think about God, uses your hands to serve God, uses your voice to pray about. But normally, it's lodged in that thing called spirit. That's how you relate to God. And again, animals sometimes are attributed to having soul, but not spirit. So this is our distinctive. Well, I think this also gives us intrinsic, transcendent value. If you can have a with God, that sets you apart. Well, you have something no animal has, and therefore you have transcendent special value. And therefore, if someone kills you, well, they've attacked someone who's got the capacity for it to. Well, that's horrible. Gives us our value. And also, this is something that was damaged by the fall. That relationship was broken. But now it can be renewed. It can be transformed more and more into his image. And one day it'll be perfect. When I relate with God, is perfect. Conformed to the image of Christ. Well, Christ had perfect relationship. He's a human, so as a human, he had perfect relationship with God. So I think this is, I think, the best idea of what image of God is. The capacity to have a relationship with it. That's your distinctive. That makes you valuable. That's what you were made for. To have that, to exercise that relationship with God. To enjoy that type of thing. And this is what gives us that transcendent value. And so C.S. Lewis has a great quote about this. He says, usually the most uninteresting person you meet out there on the street, one day be a creature glorified beyond your imagination. Conformed image of Christ. Or a horror, a corruption you meet only in your nightmares. Every human has one of those two deaths, either glorification or total corruption. And we're helping each other toward one or the other of those destinations in all our lives. This is why humans are so important. They have an eternal destination. They will one day be glorified with Christ. Or corruption, nothing but evil left in them, those types of things. And so this is why it's such an important thing to be a human being. Now, this is something our culture is definitely searching for. They want to say every human has value, worthy of respect, dignity. But if you ask them why, hard to say. Because they're advocating for the weak, having worthy of respect, even though they're weak and feeble and frail. And they want to say even the old have that back, although they're past their usefulness. Well, in a secular term, there's no reason to give respect, dignity, value to everyone. Need a theological reason, because they're made in God's image. That gives intrinsic value. So I think this is something that's probably the most important element of our Constitution. And so when we just think, everyone you meet, image bearer of God. will one day be either glorified, conformed to Christ's image, or a corruption or horrible you only meet in a nightmare. So this is so we're created in God's image according to God's likeness. But we're going further on that element of our design. I think that's why the Son said, "I'm fearfully wonderfully. I'm made for relationship with God." No other creatures are made with that, only us. Well, that's the first thing. And then that same verse in Genesis 1, it says, again, verse 27, so God created human beings in his own image. In the image he created, male and female, he created them. Well, so next thing we're told, Genesis 1, really early on, image of God, male and female. And this is where our culture has completely lost its bearings, okay? Lost its sense. So, question, why did God make us male and female? Well, one of it, procreation, so we'll get that second. This is, as we're constructed, it takes two to be fruitful, which we were commanded, just to be fruitful and multiply. Well, you can't do that on your own. Right? Yeah, a male and a female. So procreation, anything else? Well, we'll think about Genesis 2:18, what God said about Adam. It's not good for man to be alone. Now again, just think about that for a second. He wasn't alone, he had God. But God said, I didn't want to be alone. Now, so he's alone. He needs a companion. He didn't make another man. He made someone like Adam and yet unlike Adam. Bone of my bone, but like and yet unlike, and that difference has both delighted and perplexed us for centuries, for millennia. Yeah? So we recognize that we're different, and the difference is can be mutually enriching or hardly frustrating. Because they don't think like I do. They don't see things like I do. If it's my way or the highway, I'll be frustrated. But if it's my way or her way, oh, I get two chances to see the world through my eyes and through someone else's eyes. And that should be mutually enriching. I think that's why God made Eve, not just procreation, although that was important, but they're not just different physically, are they? We're different in terms of perspective. Now again, bigger and smaller and different types of our brain centers are more developed than men and women. So we have these differences that should be a source of mutual enrichment. Unless everyone should be like me. Yeah? And foolishly, some men think that. Yeah? I'll see them more often. But God made Eve. And I think I made this for you mutual enrichment, God. So I think even single people who are not married in relationship with someone of the opposite sex, because they will enrich them. For example, think if there's a building community for a church building composed only of men. Useful but ugly, okay? Only ornamental, but maybe not engineered very well. Okay? Well, I need both of those insights, perspectives, those types of things. And so you do too. Now again, I've been living with one woman for 47 years now. And again, I think I'm a better human for the process. I'm a more complete human being for the process of understanding something. And again, I still would not claim to understand my wife completely. She can still surprise me. But at times I can see something from her point of view. And that should be enriching. So I think God had that. And then there's an attraction there. Look at Genesis 2:23 and 24. They give us some reasons for why God made male and female. Again, after God creates Eve, presents him to Adam, those types of things, and he says, this is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She should be called a woman. She was taken out of man. And then look at the next three words. For this reason. Well, what reason? Well, because God made male and female, for this reason, there should be marriage. God made it male so that they could have this relationship that we call, they could, again, you can leave your father and be united to your wife, and they become one flesh, and this is part of God. I made them, and this is for this reason, marriage happens. Because God made us, so this is the natural result of God making us, man. So there's an attraction. Again, there's interesting, when in verse 23, when Adam says, this is now, the word there is at last. You know, where have you been all my life? Yeah. There's an attraction there. Yeah. And these, so God put that in there because He intends this differentiation, male and female, to lead to attraction that leads to this one flesh relationship. And so both one flesh union, a bonding there, and procreation that comes out of that. As we mentioned, be fruitful and multiply takes two to obey. That issue. First command given to them. First thing, be free. So now this is part of our work. We'll talk about this in the next week. Yeah, we call having childbirth, we call that labor, right? And that's when the work begins. Yeah. So this is part of our work. Yeah. And this isn't got assigned. Well, this is requires us to be male and female. So I think these three kind of stand out. God made us different to enrich each other. He made us different perspectives, understandings, worldview, those types of things. And then there's attraction there. We've been that we feel, and then that's meant to lead to bonding and birth babies. And so the reason for sexual activity, bonding and babies, okay? No mention here, it's for your personal enjoyment. Now, God has made it enjoyable, that secret's out, yeah? But the purpose for sexual union is bonding and babies, yeah? And those two things, and we've kind of forgotten that as well. We'll come back to that in a second. So this is the basic why God made us this way. But in the 2,000 years since we've been around here, since this understanding, there are 4 new challenges on the horizon I'm going to talk about with you. And we'll explore this as deeply as we can in a limited time. The first is the idea of being egalitarian or complementarian. Now, those are big words. So listen, these two, egalitarian means we're equal, and therefore there can be no sex-based roles. That violates equality. That's what some believe. They'll say, well, equal doesn't mean identical, so maybe we're complementary. And therefore there could be complementary roles that males and females take. And this is the conversation going on across churches and our convention this past summer with the idea of women serving as pastors, and some think that's not right, other think that's fine, things like that. I think there are 3 key texts that seem to me to support the idea they were made with complementary, not identical roles. That doesn't involve equality, because we're so equal in worth. We're both image bearers of God, both loved by God, gifted by God, valued by God. And these are different roles, not even different abilities, but different roles. Look at Genesis 2:18 again. That first verse where God mentions his desire to make a companion for the man. Genesis 2:18, not good for the man to be alone. I'll make a helper suitable for him. Well, now, helper is most often used for God. So this is not a demeaning word. It's not some low, subordinate idea. But this is something used for Eve, never used for Adam. So Eve has a role Adam doesn't have. Eve, you're to be helping him. There's no reciprocal relationship there. So there's a complementarity here. Adam was given other jobs to take care of the garden. And he was given a different job to be Adam's helper. So there can be different roles without violating equality. So I think this is one important text. The second is Ephesians 5. Now, again, you should probably be aware of that text. It's again a great text on comparing husband and wife to Christ and the church, and that are mirrors there. And again, describing husbands as being laying down their lives for their wife, like Christ did for the church. And so, husbands and wives depict Christ and the church. That was not an egalitarian relationship. The role of Christ are not identical. They're complementary. And so here's a fourth reason why God made us male and female. And so when God made us male, he was intending way down the road, let this picture Christ and the church for the whole world. They can see in this relationship Christ and the church. It's only possible if the husband and the wife have differing roles, because Christ, the church, have different roles. I think this is a strong text for company. And then the last is 1 Timothy 2:11. And there are lots of things that are can be raised questions about this, but I want to look at one particular verse there, 1 Timothy 2:11-12. It says, verse 11, a woman should learn in quietness and full submission, but I do not permit a woman to teach with some authority over a man. She must be quiet. Now, there's two things here that she should not teach with some authority over a man. Well, is that a blanket statement? I don't think so, because we're commanded to teach one another. Colossians 3:16. And definitely mothers should teach their kids and other women. So I don't think this is a blanket statement. Well, then what kind of teaching and authority might Paul have in mind? Well, the next thing he talks about, 1 Timothy 3, is the office of elder, overseer. Pastors teach, they exercise some authority in their congregation. But I think that's what Paul had in mind when he mentioned teaching and exercising authority. I don't want a woman to serve in the office of pastor. And so that's what complementarians say, those types of things. It doesn't say because you're unable to do it. It doesn't, because I know some very gifted teachers. Linda probably enjoys listening to Beth more than me, okay? She starts to mention me anyway. But so she loves Beth more. Priscilla Shire. She loves lots of they're very gifted teachers out there. Some have very good pastoral skills, but it exercises those in the context of the office of pastor. At least that's our understanding of it. And I think that's what this is saying here. So again, I think this is really not in the fact that they can't do it, but again, in something about creation. Verse 30, Adam was formed first, then Eve. Well, some say, well, maybe Paul mentioned this because in that era, women weren't educated enough to teach. But it doesn't say, he says, the reason why I'm saying this is not because they're unable, because Adam was formed. There'll never be a culture or then when Adam wasn't formed first. So I think this has ongoing relevance. And so this is the reason why Southern Baptists think that we should not serve in the role of pastor. Now, aside from that, I think I'm pretty wide open to other options there. In terms of things like, again, we were talk about this deacon could minister as deacons. Well, there's one verse that seems to hint at the possibility of that, but we don't get into that. But aside from those offices, anything else, wide open. So this past year, a Sunday week ago, I had a young girl that baptized when she led to Christ. Huh? I had no problem with that. Yeah. And she led her to Christ. Why shouldn't you baptize her? We see also fathers baptizing their kids and things like that. So again, I think lots of room for openness in one's ministry, but the office of pastor, because these are complementary roles, both in marriage, so in the home, in the church. I think there's some differentiation of roles there. So this is called complementarian rather than egalitarian. Now, anybody want to further on that issue?
When you say that a lot of it has to do with just order.
Yeah.
so things don't get chaotic, you
Yeah.
keep it in order.
Yeah, there's, so again, I think that has something to do with it as well. And I think it is also, there's a teaching here. I think there's something that here's the issue. The lesson of submission is for all believers. But we accept submission, we're all as members submission to our elders. All wives to their husbands. Again, so I think the lesson of submission is all Christians need to learn. So it shouldn't be surprising to the different contexts. Second issue that's been put up is homosexuality or same-sex marriage. Now, there's 6 passages that prohibit same-sex intercourse. Some call these the clobber passages because they're sometimes used to clobber gay people and don't know about that. I'm going to focus on one, Romans 1:26 and 27, and we'll look at that one. And then I'll try to give you some background in terms of what's going on in some discussion. Romans 1:26 and 27. And by the way, this is the only one that mentions lesbian homosexuality. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust, even there which seems natural sexual relations from unnatural ones. The same way, men also had natural relationships with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men can show shameful acts with each other and receive the due penalty for their error. So this seems pretty clear, but some say, well, wait a second. Paul mentions shameful lust. What about 2 people who are attracted to each other, same-sex people, and they form a consensual, committed relationship? And is this shameful? They're not doing something shameful. They're simply loving each other as and they find that would be natural for them to do it that way. Is this included in Paul's prohibition? Those types of things. Well, again, he says this is contrary to your nature. And so there's an echo back to creation here. And so again, you're acting contrary. But they say, but it's natural for me. Well, natural now equals fallen. Natural, original is what should be. And so but here's the reality. People out there that say, I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. I tried to get away, but I can't. I'm not attracted to I'm attracted to people of the same sex. Again, why should I marry them? Well, because Jesus, look at Matthew 19, and how Jesus connects 2 passages. Matthew 19. And this is important because Jesus didn't say about homosexuality. Well, look at Matthew 19, 4 and 5. He said, haven't you read? At the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, unite to his wife. So the reason for marriage is because God made them male and female. So a male or female marriage relationship is contrary to how God instituted. Now again, I don't think we need to condemn a person because he had that attraction. So if someone says to you, by the way, maybe a friend, cousin, by the way, I'm gay. Yeah, okay, yeah. So how should you respond? He says, I'm gay. Thank you for sharing it. That really showed you trust me. That must have been hard for you to say. That must have been really difficult. That tells me you trust me. You think our relationship is valuable. So thank you for. I want to talk more about what that means for you when you're ready to talk about that. Because here's the question: is this an orientation or a lifestyle? Because there's some that say, I have this orientation, but I'm battling it. I'm not going to indulge. That person deserves our support. I met a couple of students at seminary who said, I'm same-sex attracted. I choose not to live that way. I don't have to obey my desire. No one does. And so they choose. I think God has called me to celibacy. And we'll talk more about that in a second. There's a valid call that God gives to his son to celibacy. And if you can't be attracted to, well, maybe that's your calling to celibacy. Well, I'm very, but if said, well, I'm adopting a homosexual lifestyle, well, then, well, do you know what scripture says about that? That God made marriage because he made us male and female. And you're going to lose, and this is not what a marriage is supposed to be. And again, friendship is one thing, and I can say having a very close friendship, but using your body to engage in a same-sex relationship is contrary to how God has made you. Now, if you're interested, I brought along my favorite book on this topic, People to be Loved. It's a why homosexuality is more than just an issue. He said, you can get the Bible right and get love wrong, and you're wrong. To get the Bible right, you get love right too. So he has homosexual friends. He mentions them in the course of this book. So I like his discussion. If you want to see the other side, there's a book by Matthew Vance called God and the Gay Christian. Matthew Vance is a young man who is a professing Christian, professes respect for the Bible, but he is same-sex attracted and is in a relationship with another man. So he tried to justify it, and he tried to say, I think those things in the Bible, those verses that we put, well, that was mentioning those who are in an unnatural same-sex relationship. Those for whom it's unnatural. For me, it's natural. Yeah, this is about shameful. We're not lustful. We're simply engaged in a committed, consensual relationship. We're with each other. So he tries to explain away those verses, things like that. Well, again, at least be aware. That's what people out there say. They say, "Well, I know these verses. They don't apply to our relation. It's not unnatural. It's not shameful." In fact, they say, "Well, Paul was referencing men who would have sex with boys, or masters with their slaves. That's what Paul prohibited. Exploitative, coercive, same-sex. Well, that's not. Well, no, it's unnatural. It's contrary to how God said. So this is the idea. This is homosexuality, same-sex relationship, and probably someone will one day invite you to their same-sex wedding. A cousin, some relative, things like that. Again, I'd respond, thank you, I'm honored that you would want me at this occasion in your life. I love you, I value our relationship too. I don't think you want me there because I would be very sad. And I don't want someone, because I think you're doing something that's contrary to God's will for your life. I can't rejoice there, so I don't think you want me there being sad at your wedding. But if you let me come over your house for dinner after, fine, I'd be glad to meet your partner and get to know you. Yeah, I still love you. Continue our relationship. So I think we can expand our conscience, preserve our conscience, and still not break the relationship there. But again, I've had some people at Faith that have said, Faith that's a nephew invited me to his same-sex wedding. So that same-sex relationship. If I'm going further on same-sex relationships, again, distinguish orientation and action. Those who refine their orientation, these are our support, encouragement, and blessing. And there's a number of courageous people choosing that path now. Okay? But if they live that lifestyle, we can't affirm that.
You do hear that they say, well, I was born that way.
Yeah.
And then, like when I worked, there was this person he said he was married. He had been married before, and he loved his wife, and they had a son. But then he said, I'm attracted to men. And I said, well, did you love your wife? And he said, yes. I said, well, don't you think that God can help you love a woman again? But he said, I don't want a woman.
Yeah.
I want a man.
Here's the thing.
So he's choosing.
Yeah.
That's a choice.
That's the thing. You may be born with that attraction. But I could say, well, I was born to desire more than one woman. I choose not to indulge that desire. Or someone who's heterosexual, I'm not married either. And I have these desires, but I'm gonna have sex with a woman I'm not married to. And so I think we ought to say our desires don't control us.
Right.
And that's why I think identifying ourselves by desires is a mistake. So I say you're not gay, you're image bearer of God. That's who you are. And live in accordance with that. Third issue, even hotter now, is transgender. And this is something that historically was a small, minute portion of the population, like 3 out of 1,000, something like that, far less than 1% now. And it was almost always male to female. But there's a whole rash of teenage girls seeking to become men now. And again, they're kind of to mandate gender-friendly treatment for them. Well, they're confused. Puberty's tough. Give them a few years to find out who they are. Don't block their hormones and stop all those irreversible things like that. Again, because if you give them time, most of those confusion will exist. But here's the attractiveness for a lot of people is if I'm that, I'm part of a minority, I'm a victim, and I get lots of attention. Therefore, and almost all the cases they're seeing of these young girls, they find some friends online who will affirm them, and that's their friend. And for you, peer groups are so important. And so their peer groups will tell them this is who you are. And so I think this is something that's going on now. I want to distinguish 2 types of groups here, or maybe 3 groups. There are some that are political activists, and they want to change the laws and all those types of things. And I think that they're sadly so mistaken, and they're, I think, the ones that are our enemy. Now we're to love our enemy, but they're our enemies. Yeah. And a lot of people, they're just hurting, and sadly, the pain, what they call gender dysphoria, is real and is severe. Very high suicide rate among those dealing with this condition. So I don't want to minimize the pain, the struggle they face, and those types of difficulties and things like that. So I have compassion for them. And then that third group is those that are confused, and give them some time. But for me, is there a verse that speaks to this one? The verse that came to me is 1 Corinthians 6:20. Honor God with your body. Don't destroy it. Don't mangle it. Don't twist it. Honor God with it. And again, I don't want to minimize the fact that you may have tremendous difficulty doing that. And we will support you and help you as you're wrestling with that. But the command is to honor God with your body. And so I think that's where we've got to in the end come down. Now, there's a smaller, even smaller slice of this that's even more difficult. It's called those that we call now intersex. You can call hermaphrodite and things like they call intersex. And these are those at birth, their sex is not clear. Now, this is an extremely rare phenomenon. But can you imagine being a parent? We're not sure whether your baby is a boy or a girl. Well, you're usually faced with a choice. What do you write down on the birth certificate? You do some plastic surgery to make them look more like one than the other. Well, for those parents, I have tremendous sympathy because, again, this is something that is surely a mark of the fall. This is a defect. It's not something that we want to affirm a century. So this is something we have to deal with, but it's not the rule. This is the exception. This does not mean that God doesn't want people to be male or female. And interesting, those that are this way, they usually identify one way or the other later in life. But the difficulty is when you're a baby, you can't tell that. Yeah. So here's the horrible thing. If you say, well, I think it is a he who raised him as a boy, around 12, he starts having all these desires to do girly things. He said, you would choose wrong. So this is a horrible situation, but fortunately, that's a very, very small, minute portion of people. So the first issue we got to deal with is egalitarian in terms of roles and things like that. Same sex, transgender. and then singleness. Interesting. My kids' generation are having more and more trouble finding marriage partners. They were getting married later in life, some not getting married at all, and so the number of single young is going very rapidly. Because again, it used to be you got married because that's when you could have sex, have kids. But today, sex outside of marriage, even having kids, that's no longer shameful, no longer looked frowned upon, those types of things. And so there's been this growth of single people in our society. Well, again, this is the most pervasive sexual sin is not same sex, it's promiscuity. And that's wildly sinful in Christian community among Christian young people. And so teaching that sex is for bonding and babies needs to be made a little bit more clear to the situation. And this is something worth waiting for, those types of things. I also want to tell single people, and I do this, marriage is good for you. For most people, there's a book called The Case for Marriage. Married men live longer than single men. They're healthier than single men. Because their wife says, you will go through that, doctor. Yeah. Yeah. And you won't go out with the boys and do that crazy thing anymore. So married, they live longer, they're healthier. They enjoy life more than single men. They enjoy being fathers. They find that something that they enjoy. So they say they make more money than single men at the same job because they work a little bit harder. Because they're taking care of a wife and a family. So it's good for, how about for women? Women have less mental illness when they're married. They're less depressed. They are less likely to be the victim of a violent crime. Less likely to be in poverty. Because the biggest poverty gap in America, single moms, that's where poverty exists. So it's good for men, good for women, good for kids as well. Again, a sociologist came with proof that the best situation for kids is a mom and a dad. He got crucified for saying that out loud. They said, deny his tenure at the university, blackballing. Boy, we did the study. It's statistically valid. This is the best way. But again, I want to hear that there's steps to things. So again, I want us to tell kids marriage is good. It's good for you. It's good for most people, things like it. But I do want to say there's also room for a calling to be a single person. Again, Jesus was. Paul was. 1 Corinthians 7, Paul says it's even better. You can serve Christ with no distraction. If you're a husband, you're commanded to love your wife and care for her. That will take some of your time. And so he said, there's a valid call to celibacy. I want to at least affirm it. It's an interesting thing. It's not affirmed in the Old Testament. And you had to have a kid to carry on the family line inheritance. So there's no affirmation of sin in the New Testament. Jesus said there's some that become used for the sake of the kingdom. And then Paul says, it's good to be like me. But I don't want to tell you that you have to get married. You're an oddball if you're single. Now, Paul does say you'll have some struggles, It's a single person. But that may be God's calling in your life. So I want to say that the rise in singleness, but it may not all be bad. I think most is bad. Because they're not being celibate singles. They're being sexually active singles. Having kids even. So those things could be better. Well, so this is how God made us. He made us in His image, male and female. We skate through 4 hugely controversial topics in our culture. Any last question? By the way, I brought another book. Same guy. This is my go-to book on transgender. Preston Sprinkled Embodied. So the same author. I like the way he writes. He's a New Testament scholar, so it's not easy reading. It's a little bit deep reading. But I think those are my 2 best books on same-sex and transgender. Any question you want to go further on?
I have a cousin who's a doctor, he's now retired. We were discussing, the transgenderism, and so yeah, the majority of it is just the social aspect.
Yeah, yeah.
But he said that there's a very small, minute percentage of kids that are born and they don't have a particular sex.
Intersex, yeah.
Okay, and I chimed in, I said, well, I remember. I'm a deer hunter. And I said, every year there's 1 or 2 antler deer that are female
Wow. Yeah,
that are shot.
Yeah.
The world has fallen, it's not good.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
an example.
Yeah, we'll talk about this, that again, you gotta be careful, people often justify, well, this is natural for me. Well, natural for all of us now is fallen. If you come naturally, things will not go well for you. Yeah. Now, I don't drive like I want to on the highway. Yeah, and I can't just act naturally on the highway, things like that, I have to restrain myself, there's such a thing, so again, we have to live that way because we are fallen. Yeah. But then we'll come back next week and we'll go on to the fact that God made us to be workers, minister for community, we'll talk about those things. Have you been to the state fair?
Not yet.
No? Richmond, what we got, they got 15,000 New Testament giving out.
Yeah,
giving out.
about 15,000 testaments try to get out of that this week.
Wow.
That I had fallen and hurt my back and bruised myself all up, so I'm not able to get over there and do anything.
Well, I think your role is praying for them now, brother, so.
Yeah.
But yes, so if you have to look for the immediate